Well, it's Christmas Eve 2018, and look what FedEx just dropped off in my driveway. A massive box from Jerry Lavasseur. According to his email, it's to show his appreciation for the videos, and boy did he. Let's open this jewel up and see what's inside. I'm not sure if you can see very well in the shadow, but it appears to be a virtually mint Silvertone Reverberation Twin 12. I think this is a 1474 because it's the combo amp. It's not the head and speaker cab type like I've been working on. Oh, I can't wait to get this out of the box. There's also a separate box over here that I'm going to guess has the tubes in it. Okay, so let's get this beast out of the box and see just how wonderful it is. Well, as you can see, this is quite an unpacking production here out in the driveway. Made a little more difficult by the fact that the amplifier chassis is not connected to the cabinet. I'm going to have to figure some way to keep it from sliding down out the back while I continue unpacking. Okay, it's a little dusty. The front is pretty close to looking mint. The back, I had to get a set of screws here to hold the chassis in because it's on a sloping board. So when I unwrapped it, the chassis kept wanting to slide down on me. Now the downside that I see is a rat's nest in here that rivals the one in the 1485, and the floor is going to need a lot of work, but as we've seen, that can all be done. On the plus side, look at those gorgeous Jensen Special Design speakers. Still intact. We'll have to see if the rats nibbled on the cones. Chassis is immaculate, and thank God the tubes were packed separately. Otherwise, I don't think they would have survived with that chassis loose and flapping around in there. Okay, time to get out the vacuum cleaner and de-rat nest it. You know, I would think if I were Silvertone's advertising agency, I would say put out an ad something like 9 out of 10 rats prefer to nest in Silvertone amp cabinets. Yes, as you can see here, that floor is actually just disintegrating, so it looks like the cabinet will get a new floor. It might be better for it in the long run. Look at that odd foam-mounted reverb tank. It's probably the same spring inside that we've seen in the 1484 and 1485, just a different type of housing. Well, I opened the box that I thought contained the tubes, and it sure does, and a whole bunch more, it looks like. I'm going to have to empty this out and see what all's in here. Good grief. Looks like a massive tube stash here, all boxed. I'll have to check the numbers and see how many of them are amp related, hopefully all. What a extra discovery this is. As you can see, things are pretty rough here. I've removed that little reverb tank, and I think I'm going to actually just remove the floor from the cabinet right now. There's no use trying to clean this, and I really can't store it indoors like this. Yeah, after I set the amp on its face, you can see how the floor is just disintegrating. Okay, the floor has been completely removed and disposed of. Of course, I was wearing a mask and gloves at the time, so don't worry. And put it back into the box here where I'll put this back up against the wall to store it until I'm ready to fix this thing. Well, it's time now to fabricate the floor for the rat-infested 1474 cabinet. I removed all the nuts from the speakers and the screws for the transformers, and I removed the amp chassis. Pretty soon then we'll just have the bare cabinet. I think I'll probably pull out the baffle also. One thing about it, it's masonite, but it looks like it's twice as thick. We'll see. Okay, and then prepare these surfaces so that a nice flat fresh piece of birch 1/2-inch plywood can be installed as a floor. Okay, the baffle and amplifier board are out, and I was wrong. Although it looks like it's a double thickness here, remember the upper one is just that frame that goes between the grill cloth and the baffle. Really holding the speakers as just one single little 1/4-inch piece of masonite. although this doesn't seem to be warped or have ever been water damaged, so it may well work for 212s. Well, this bottom molding, that is the molding around the grill cloth, was just barely hanging, so I broke it loose. I think I'm going to run it through the table saw with a blade along this side to clean this up and make it perfectly flat. Well, I decided to use a hammer and chisel to clean off this surface, and as you can see, the right half's been done and the left hand side needs a whole bunch more scraping and chiseling. Okay, that bottom trim piece is all stripped of the particle board and glue so that it's perfectly flat and smooth, and now I've reinstalled it and used 2 wood screws in the corners to make sure that it's in there and will stay. Okay, now it's time to cut and fit the new floor to the framed bottom of the cabinet. Well, the new floor has been installed, heavily glued, and then with long screws going into both of these vertical pillars. As you can see, the joints are sealed, and I've also upholstered the bottom so that it matches up with the rest of the cabinet well, and continued that white bead all the way around. Now all I need is the little triangular corner braces here, and the cabinet will be pretty well finished. Alright, here's the cabinet with the floor completely installed, covered, and also I've installed the feet with like 1/2-inch spacers to get it a little bit up off the floor. Okay, so that job's done. Now it's time to put the baffle in and the amp board. Alright, the speaker baffle and amp board have now been reinstalled, and it's time now to measure, cut, and fit a back door for this. Since it was missing, I'll also have to upholster it with a matching material. I'm now in the process of cleaning up the speakers and waxing and shining up the baskets. As you can see, these speakers are absolutely perfect. Fortunately, the rats did not find them to be very tasty, so they left them alone. Thank God. Well, the speakers are all cleaned up and waxed and shiny and reinstalled on the baffle with their transformers. Now, it's easy to think that these are output transformers, but they aren't. If you notice, there's no primary and secondary. They're more like filter chokes, and they're put right across both of the speaker terminals. See if you can guess what purpose they serve. Next, we have to attach the reverb tank right down in this area. Now, the reverb tank is installed, centered right under the left-hand speaker, and now I'm going to show you a very simple way to test the piezo transducers on either end of the tank without disassembling it. Set your digital multimeter to capacitance, and then check the capacitance between the shield and prong of each of the cables that come out of the reverb tank. And if you look up here, we'll see we have around 0.6 nanofarads of capacitance on that lead, and around 0.7 nanofarads on this lead. The fact that they're consistent and that they have easily measurable capacitance tells me that the piezo transducers in both ends of this tank are in excellent shape. Well, the cabinet is now finished. The rear panel is in place, which gives sort of some resonance, I would think, to those two 12-inch speakers. Now it's time to overhaul the chassis, get a tube set, and get it working properly before it is installed back in the cabinet. Before I start on the 1474 chassis, I thought you'd get a kick out of 1485 and two 1484s that I have in here for repairs, and of course the 85 is mine. Was featured in a previous video. It's not often that you get to see four of these things together like this. Here's a helpful tip for those of you who have Silvertone amps that use the 3-inch machine screw and flush mount nut to hold the chassis in the cabinet. It seems like at least 2 of these are always missing, but you can make some perfect replacements with a simple number 8 3-inch machine screw, and then get some of the T-nuts like they sell at Lowe's or Home Depot, break off the prongs like this, and then use this. It's actually, if anything, a superior replacement to the original. Well, now it's time to recap the 1474, and as if by magic, we see the brand new capacitors in place. And the brand new 3-wired chassis grounding power cord. The chassis was in really good shape, but had about 55 years of accumulated grime all over the surface, but with some towels, Windex, Q-tips, toothbrushes, etc., it cleaned up real nicely. Okay, so now it's recapped, it's cosmetically cleaned up, and it's time to put in a tube set and see if the amplifier circuit itself is functional. Okay, we've got the tube set in, we're plugged into the Variac. Let's see if channel 1 will amplify. Oh yes. Now let's try channel 2. Okay, now we're in channel 2. That amplifies 2. Let's see if we have any tremolo. Yes, we do. Well, so far so good on this. Now, of course, I'm going to have to check all the tube voltages and look for overheating resistors or other components. But for now, we have a working amp. As usual, the knobs are a grubby mess, but after a little Windex, they come out looking pretty much like new. Now the control panel has been thoroughly cleaned and waxed with car wax, and the freshly cleaned knobs have been installed. So now the control panel looks pretty close to as good as new, I would say. At least I hope so. Now it's time to do an electronic checkup on the 1474 amp. As you can see, it has 4 6L6s, 2 pairs. Each pair has its own output transformer and 8-ohm speaker. Okay, so first off, let's check plate voltage, plate current, and calculate the plate dissipation. My initial measurement of the plate dissipation of the 4 output tubes showed that the plate current was rather high at about 45 to 50 milliamps, and the plate voltage was rather low, actually below 300 volts. The schematic says it should be up around 340. It also says that the cathode voltage should be around 27 volts, and it was only about 22. So my remedy was to replace the cathode bias resistor with one of higher value, and that brought the plate current down, the plate voltage up, and the cathode voltage to exactly 27 volts, as the schematic suggests. I also found that the amp was absolutely dead quiet and created a slight glow in my current limiter, which is not unexpected from an amplifier that's rated rather conservatively at 50 watts. Okay, this is about twice the size of the largest amp I normally deal with, so I could probably go up a little in wattage on my bulb. But anyway, you get a faint glow, and that is perfectly normal. Then finally, I plugged in the reverb tank to the 2 jacks and found that the reverb effect seems to work quite well. We'll have to plug in a guitar, of course, to see how it sounds, but it is working. Okay, so that's about it. I'm going to install the amplifier now in the cabinet, hook everything up, and strum a few chords to see how it sounds. Well, here are the final bias values for the amp. The plate voltage, plate to cathode, was 300 volts, but I believe in the schematic, when they show a 340 volt plate voltage, they're measuring it to ground. Okay, so I ended up with 327 volts plates to ground, which I think is close enough. These are the resistance measurements of each of the half windings for each output transformer connected to this pair of tubes and this pair of tubes. This is the voltage drop across that resistance. This is the plate current in milliamps. You see it ranges from around 33 to 39. The tubes are not perfectly matched, but they're fairly matched. And a plate dissipation then ranges from about 10 to 11.67. Okay, which is conservative for 6L6 GCs, and that's the way I want to keep it. Okay, flowing a modest amount of current and running at a moderate plate dissipation. These tubes should last a long time, as should the amp itself. Well, it's time to put it all together. I've got the amp cabinet up on the workbench with the back panel removed. I've reinstalled the reverb tank, and now it's time to install the chassis up here on this sloping chassis board with screws now, so that it doesn't slide off into an expensive pile of shrapnel. One thing you need to remember before you install the chassis in the cabinet is to solder your 3 speaker wires to the terminal strip, because after this is in the cabinet and the roof is right here, it would be very difficult to solder them. Okay, the amplifier is now installed on that sloping particle board shelf, held in with the 6 screws that were missing when the amp was delivered. I notice there's another set of 6 screw holes up here along the top of the control panel that allows you to attach it to the top molding of the cabinet. That's going to be the last thing I do, because until I know this works really well and it's going to stay in the cabinet, I'm not going to struggle putting those screws in. Next, you can route the speaker wires through the right hole on the shelf and run your reverb wires up through the hole on the left side and plug them in. Now it's time to wire the speakers. Okay, using a couple strain reliefs and zip ties, I have routed the speaker wires up and out of harm's way and down to the speaker terminals. I was very careful to ensure that the same terminal on both speakers is the hot terminal and the other one is the common terminal. Well, that's about it. The speakers are all neatly wired, reverb tanks installed and connected, amp chassis installed on the shelf, and now it's time to plug it in and see if it still works. Let's take a few minutes here to acknowledge receipt of some really nice presents from some very generous viewers. First off, John Mayhew at Microphonics sent me this brand new 6.5 inch Eminence speaker. Now I'll have to come up with some project or something to use it, because it's too nice to just let sit on the shelf. Next, a viewer named Joseph Von Kanel sent me a capacitance substitution box and a resistance substitution box. For those of you who aren't familiar with these devices, they're about as helpful as it gets when you're trying to tune a circuit. You can connect these two little alligator clips where you want to the component to bridge, and then you can dial in all sorts of values of capacitance or resistance until you find the ideal one that works best, and then hardwire that value into the circuit. It's a whole lot better than fumbling with little individual caps or resistors, as I've had to do now for a long time. So this is an immensely useful gift, and I truly appreciate it, Joseph. Okay, it's Sunday morning. The neighbors are still asleep, but not for long. It's about 35 degrees in the workshop, but I just couldn't resist seeing what this beast sounds like with a guitar plugged in. So we're on channel 1. Volume is right around a quarter, which is about all I can stand. And treble a little over halfway, and I'd say bass at halfway. So let's strum a few chords and see how it sounds. Okay, here's channel 2 with the same settings. Everybody complains about how lousy the reverb is. Let's see if they're right or not. Okay, the reverb now is at about 50%. I can definitely hear it. Now let's try 3/4. Sounds like plenty of reverb to me. Let's go 100% on the reverb. Well, that sure sounds like plenty of reverb to me. Unless you're planning on playing a surf concert or something, I think this should be more than enough. Now let's go back to channel 1 and try the tremolo. This is at half settings, both for speed and intensity. You know, for half speed, that's one of the slowest tremolos I've heard. Let's crank it up a little faster and a little more intensity. Okay, I decided to just go WFO here, and both speed and intensity are maxed out. Before I tear into the circuit to try to figure out what's wrong with channel 2 and the tremolo, let's address a couple issues unique to this amplifier. Number 1, let's look at the model number from Sears. It's 185.10411. Now let's look at the schematic that is, as far as I know, the only one that's available on the internet for this model. And look right here at the part number 185.10410, not 11. And the difference goes way beyond that single digit. The 410 schematic shows 3 12AX7s here in the preamp, whereas the one we're working on has a 6 CG7 in this position. Okay, you think, well, maybe that's just a typographical error up here and at the bottom. No. They show the 12AX7 here, whereas in this amp it's a 6CG7. Also, this schematic shows a balance control and a threshold control for the reverb, which does not exist in the one that we're working on. So my question is, are there any 1474s out there that are actually model 410s that have the 3 12AX7s and the 2 extra reverb controls? If so, let us know down in the comment section. If not, if there aren't any, then I think it's safe to assume that this is like some preliminary or prototype schematic that was put out before production, and that in reality the 1474s that you will encounter are really Model 411s and do not match this schematic. Or perhaps even more likely, the Model 411 was an updated version released after the 410, and it was simplified to reduce production cost by leaving off those two extra reverb controls. And no schematic was ever created or released for it. I'll leave it up to you all out there in YouTube land to resolve this issue with your comments. The second issue is why this amp with four 6L6s is rated at 50 watts, whereas the 1485 with four 6L6s is rated at 100 watts. The difference is that the 85 specifies 6L6 GCs, and this amp specifies just 6L6 Gs. And I think it's a good time now to clear up something about the difference between these tubes. 6L6 Gs and GCs are very different tubes, and I don't know that everybody realizes the difference. Okay, Gs are rather conservative tubes. Plate dissipation is limited to 19 watts. Plate current can go higher than this, but generally you'll bias them around 35 to 45 milliamps, whereas GCs, plate dissipation is 30 watts, okay, almost double. The plate current can go much higher than this, but this is sort of fairly standard plate current biasing. But the plate voltage, there's a huge difference. Gs generally operate around 350, 360 volts. GCs can go up to 450 or 470. So as you can see, apples and oranges. These are super tubes. These are fairly standard, sort of moderate performing tubes. Now the 1474 specifies the Gs, whereas the 1485 specifies GCs. That's the difference in the power output. Now, the only match set of four 6L6s I had on hand are GCs. So here's where the quandary arises. Do I bias them as GCs in an amp that specifies Gs, or do I bias them conservatively? And I think you know the answer. When I biased these tubes for this circuit, I had to obey the restrictions of the circuit itself. So as you can see, I stuck with a plate current and a plate dissipation, which is more appropriate for G tubes, even though I was using GCs. Now someday I might get a nice set of matched Gs and I'll put them in here, but until then I'm going to keep this set in with their modest bias that better suits the lower performing tube. But I think the bottom line here, the thing you need to take away from this, is you can put GCs in a G circuit, but you can't put Gs in a GC circuit. Well, Jack, considering the dismal performance of this amp, are you and Ollie ready to play any tunes? Apparently not. I guess you agree then. I'm just going to have to take it apart and somehow make it work right. Okay? Well, thank you for guiding me in the right direction. So on that happy note, I guess it's time to sign off here on part 1 of the 1474 video series. Please join us in part 2, where we take this wretched thing apart for about the 700th time and try to figure out what's wrong with it, repair it, and see if we can't get Jack and Ollie to play some tunes through it. Okay, if this appeals to you, then stay tuned for part 2. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for their generous contributions during the previous month, and also for viewers who have been sending some really nice gifts and amps that I can feature in future videos. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe, and most of all, please stay tuned for some of our future videos. Thanks so much, and bye for now. What do you think, Casey? – She's going over to sniff the robot. Oh, and please stay tuned as I introduce a new project that showed up in the driveway recently. I think you'll get a real kick out of it. And also, if you'd like to join in as a Patreon patron or PayPal contributor, I will have links in the video description to help you to do so. Thanks, and bye. Well, it's time to welcome a new addition to the family. This one just joined us yesterday afternoon. As you can see, it's a 1930 Ford Coupe, 5-window, chopped, seriously, and channeled. Well-built 350 Chevy engine with straight pipes. There is no auxiliary exhaust system coming out of the bottom, and it is pretty noisy. So I'm either going to have to come up with baffles or actually run the exhaust under the car through mufflers. Got the probably like 47 or so International truck headlights. I don't care for this grill shell. I think it's some like Punisher or something. It's supposed to look like a 33 or 34 Ford. I have a 32 grill shell, which I'm going to put on in just a few minutes. I'll show you what it looks like with it. Got giant, the tall, thin tires and wheels, which is the style nowadays. Engine is doesn't leak. It runs great. It's a 350 turbo hydro automatic. As you can see, you sit right on the floor and all the way back. So there's actually so much leg room in this, I can't reach the pedals. I'm going to have to bring the back of the seat forward about 4 inches, which should be a real challenge. Look on the dash, it actually has a couple little tiny instruments that fit in the original Model A instrument cluster. I'm going to have to add a GPS speedometer and a rear view mirror. If you look, the patina, as they call it, which is a nice way of saying rusty metal, is just flawless. It's beautiful. I mean, you couldn't fake this. It's real. Got the same giant tires and wheels on the back. Okay, you can see where it was chopped. No glass now in the side windows, the little quarter window, and the back window. I'll have to add glass. The roll-up mechanisms are missing, so I'll have to get those also. It's got a steel frame that supports this snap-on top. You can take the top off quite easily and have a giant sunroof if you wish. Here at the back, some really kind of slick pinstriping, very subtle. Let me open the trunk and you'll see the details inside. We got the bungee cord trunk latch here, and we lift this up and you can see where the frame has been lifted way up in the back to allow for the very low stance. Looks like a 10-bolt, probably an S10 pickup differential. Batteries accessible, and good size spun aluminum tank with a sender unit here. I'll have to buy the sender unit, but there's a flange for it so you can actually know how much gas you have. And then nestled back in there is a little spare gas can in case you run out. I thought that was a good idea. It's got a giant panhard rod which will have to be adjusted because the right tire and wheel are a little further from the body than the left tire and wheel, so you can adjust it laterally with the panhard rod. Got the real cute vintage taillights with the little blue dots in the center, and as you can see, I heard a great expression the other day, it's lower than Beelzebub's basement. Okay, so steering wheel can be removed so that you can get in and out a little easier. Got the hobnail steering wheel with the sternum impalement bullet. Little skulls up on the dash arch. Oh, and some neat artwork on the inside of the kick panels. There's that steel ribbing that supports the roof fabric. So that's about it. I've got a bunch of work to do on this. I've got to do turn signals, little windshield wiper, an emergency brake, 32 grill shell, baffles, turn signals, things like that, a bunch of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to quit videoing and get to work. Hope you get a kick out of this beast.